The blood on Fiona Zimmerman's wedding dress had long since turned brown, but the memory of how it got there remained bright red in her mind, vivid as the moment her husband of 3 hours had been shot dead at their reception in Virginia City, Montana, back in 1878. Now, 2 years later, in the spring of 1880, she stood behind the bar of the Silver Spur Saloon in Chalice, Idaho, pouring whiskey for miners and drifters, her heart as hardened as the mountains surrounding this rough territory town. She had fled Montana after the funeral, unable to bear the pitying looks from neighbors who whispered about the curse that must follow such a young widow. At 23, Fiona had convinced herself that love was nothing more than a prelude to devastation, a cruel trick that left you bleeding out on a dance floor while fiddle music still played in the background. The man who had killed Thomas, her husband, had been caught and hanged, but justice had done nothing to fill the hollow space in her chest. She had drifted westward, taking whatever work she could find, until she landed in Chalice, a mining town nestled in a valley where the Salmon River carved its way through Idaho territory. The Silver Spur was owned by a gruff but kind man named Pete Halloran, who asked no questions about her past when she showed up looking for work. He taught her how to pour drinks, handle rowdy customers, and keep the peace without losing her dignity. Fiona was grateful for the distraction, for the endless noise that drowned out her thoughts. She kept her dark blonde hair pinned up severely, wore high-necked dresses in drab colors, and never smiled at the men who tried to charm her. She had built walls around herself, brick by brick, and she intended to keep them standing. It was a Thursday afternoon when Ethan Ramsey walked into the Silver Spur, dust covering his boots and his worn leather jacket. He was tall, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of creek water in summer, a shifting blend of green and gray. He removed his hat as he entered, a gesture of politeness that seemed almost quaint in a place where most men kept their hats on and their manners stored away. Fiona barely glanced at him as she wiped down the bar. "Whiskey," he said, his voice low and easy, with a trace of a Texas drawl that had been softened by years of wandering. She poured without meeting his eyes, slid the glass across the scarred wooden surface, and named her price. He paid without haggling, another rarity, and took his drink to a corner table. Fiona went back to her work, but she felt his gaze on her occasionally throughout the evening, not intrusive or leering, just quietly present. She had grown accustomed to men staring, but there was something different about this one, something that made her uncomfortable in a way she could not quite name. Ethan came back the next day, and the day after that. He always ordered whiskey, always said please and thank you, and always sat at the same corner table. On the fourth day, he finally spoke beyond placing his order. "You have kind hands," he said as she set down his glass. "Seems a shame to see them so tense all the time." Fiona pulled her hands back as if he had burned them. "My hands are none of your concern, mister." "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Ramsey, and you are right, of course. I apologize for the presumption." She wanted to walk away, but something in his earnest expression held her for a moment longer. "Fiona Zimmerman," she said, more curtly than she intended. "And I prefer to keep conversations with customers brief." "Understood," Ethan replied, and he did not press further. But the next day, when she brought his whiskey, he had a small bundle of wildflowers on the table, tied with a piece of twine. "Found these growing by the river," he said. "Thought they might brighten up this dark corner. You can have them if you like or not. Either way is fine." Fiona stared at the flowers, Indian paintbrush and lupine, their colors almost shockingly vibrant against the dull wood. Something twisted in her chest, painful and unwelcome. "I do not want your flowers, Mr. Ramsey." "That is all right," he said gently. "I will leave them here, and if you change your mind, they are yours." She walked away, her pulse racing with an anger she could not fully explain. Why did this stranger think he could just show up and offer her flowers, as if something as simple as wildflowers could make any difference at all? She ignored the bundle for the rest of the evening, but when she closed up the saloon that night, she found herself taking them home to her small room above the general store. She put them in a chipped cup of water and told herself it was only because it seemed wasteful to let them die. Ethan continued his pattern of quiet persistence. He never pushed, never demanded her attention, but he was there, steady as the mountains day after day. He would sometimes share small observations about the town, mention a funny thing he had seen, or comment on the weather. Fiona kept her responses minimal, but she found herself listening despite her better judgment. One afternoon, when the saloon was nearly empty, Pete called her over. "That cowboy, the one who sits in the corner, he has been asking around about work. Told him we could use someone to handle the supply runs from Bonanza, keep the stockroom organized. Thought you should know, since you will be working with him." Fiona felt a spike of alarm. "Pete, I do not think that is a good idea." "Why not? He seems honest, hard-working, better than half the drifters we get through here. Besides, I am not getting any younger, and my back cannot handle hauling those crates like it used to." She could not explain her real reason, that Ethan Ramsey made her feel things she had sworn never to feel again, that his presence unsettled the careful numbness she had cultivated. So she just nodded stiffly and went back to her work. Ethan started the following Monday. He arrived early, helped unload a wagon full of bottles and supplies, and organized everything with a methodical efficiency that even Fiona had to admit was impressive. He worked without complaint, his movements economical and sure. When he took a break, he would sometimes sit at the bar and talk to Pete, their conversation ranging from cattle prices to the best routes through the mountain passes. Fiona tried to ignore him, but it was impossible when they were working in the same space. One evening, as she was struggling to reach a bottle on a high shelf, Ethan appeared beside her. "Let me help," he said, and before she could protest, he had retrieved the bottle and handed it to her. "I could have managed," she said. "I know you could have," he replied. "But there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered freely." She wanted to snap at him, to tell him to mind his own business, but the words would not come. Instead, she just took the bottle and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back. The days turned into weeks, and spring deepened into early summer. The mountains around Chalice shed their snow, and the river ran high and fast with meltwater. Fiona found her routine disrupted by Ethan's presence in ways both small and significant. He would leave her a cup of coffee on the bar in the morning, prepared exactly how she liked it, though she had never told him her preference. He would take care of the heavier tasks without being asked, and he had a way of diffusing tense situations with customers that kept the peace without violence. One night, a drunk miner got aggressive, grabbing Fiona's wrist when she refused to pour him another drink. Before Pete could intervene, Ethan was there, his hand firmly on the miner's shoulder. "Time to let go," Ethan said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made the miner think twice. The man released Fiona and swung at Ethan instead, but Ethan sidestepped easily and guided him toward the door with a firm but not brutal grip. "Sleep it off, friend. You will feel better in the morning." After the miner had stumbled out into the night, Fiona rubbed her wrist, angry at herself for feeling shaken. Ethan approached cautiously. "Did he hurt you?" he asked. "I am fine," she said tersely. "I have dealt with worse." "I do not doubt it," Ethan said, "but you should not have to deal with it alone. I have been alone for 2 years, Mr. Ramsey. I'm quite accustomed to it." Something flickered in his eyes, a sadness that mirrored her own. Being accustomed to something does not make it right, Miss Zimmerman. She looked away, unable to hold his gaze. "Why do you care?" The question came out more vulnerable than she intended. "Because you matter," he said simply, "and because I know what it is like to be broken." The words hung between them, honest and raw. Fiona felt her carefully constructed walls tremble, and she hated him for it, even as something in her yearned to hear more. "I am not broken," she said, but the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. "All right," Ethan said softly. He did not argue, did not push, just accepted her words at face value. But they both knew the truth. That night, Fiona lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned together that had been stolen in a single moment of senseless violence. She thought about the emptiness that had consumed her since, the way she had moved through the world like a ghost. And she thought about Ethan, about his steady presence and his patient kindness, about the way he looked at her as if she were someone worth knowing. She told herself it did not matter, that she would keep her distance, that she would protect herself from any further heartbreak. But even as she made these promises to herself, she knew they were becoming harder to keep. The next morning, Fiona came downstairs to find Ethan already at work, repairing a broken table leg. He looked up when she entered and gave her a small nod of greeting. Nothing more. There was no pressure, no expectation, just acknowledgement. She poured herself coffee and stood watching him work, noting the careful way he handled the wood, the precision of his movements. "Where did you learn carpentry?" she asked, surprising herself. Ethan glanced up, equally surprised by her question. "My father. He was a furniture maker in Austin before the war. Taught me everything he knew before he died." "I am sorry," Fiona said automatically. "It was a long time ago. I was 15. Felt like the end of the world then, but I survived." He went back to his work, tightening a screw. "We survive things we think will kill us, and then we keep going. That is what people do." Fiona felt the words settle into her chest, uncomfortable in their truth. Sometimes survival is not enough. "No," Ethan agreed, looking at her directly now. "Sometimes we need a reason to live, not just exist. I spent a long time just existing. Drifted from town to town, job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. Then I came here. What makes Chalice different?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Maybe it is not the town," he said quietly. "Maybe it is the people in it." Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks, and she turned away, busying herself with unnecessary tasks. She could not let this happen, could not let herself be vulnerable again. But Ethan did not seem deterred by her retreat. He just finished fixing the table and moved on to his next task, whistling softly under his breath. Over the following weeks, Fiona found herself drawn into conversations with Ethan despite her best intentions. He had a way of asking questions that made her want to answer, and he listened with genuine interest when she spoke. She learned that he had fought in the latter part of the Civil War, though he never spoke of it with pride or glory, only a quiet sadness for all that had been lost. He had worked as a ranch hand, a deputy, a scout, moving from place to place, never quite finding where he belonged. "What made you stop drifting?" she asked one afternoon as they sat on the back steps of the saloon during a rare quiet moment. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, watching the river in the distance. "I realized I was running from ghosts instead of toward anything real. Figured it was time to stop running and start building something." "And you think you can build something here?" Fiona asked, skepticism creeping into her voice. "I think I can try," he said, turning to look at her. "I think that is all any of us can do, try, and hope that maybe we will find someone willing to try alongside us." Fiona stood abruptly, feeling the walls closing in despite being outdoors. "I should get back to work." "Fiona," Ethan said, and the way he said her name, gentle and full of understanding, nearly broke her. "I am not him. Whoever hurt you, whoever made you afraid of this, I am not him." "My husband did not hurt me," she said, her voice shaking. "He loved me. And then he died, and I learned that love is just another word for eventual loss." "So you would rather feel nothing?" Ethan asked, standing as well but keeping his distance. "You would rather go through life protected but empty?" "Yes," Fiona said fiercely, "because empty is safe, and safe is all I have left." "That is not living," Ethan said, and there was pain in his voice now. "That is just dying slowly." Fiona fled back into the saloon, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She threw herself into her work, serving customers with mechanical efficiency, refusing to think about Ethan's words or the truth they carried. But that night, As she lay in bed, she could not escape the realization that he was right. She had been dying slowly, day by day, killing off pieces of herself to avoid pain. The next morning, Ethan brought her coffee as usual, but this time there was a folded piece of paper beside the cup. Fiona waited until he was busy with other tasks before unfolding it. The handwriting was neat and clear. I will wait as long as it takes, even if it takes forever. You are worth waiting for. Fiona crumpled the paper in her fist, torn between anger and something that felt dangerously like hope. How dare he be so patient, so understanding, so relentlessly kind? How dare he make her want things she had sworn to never want again? But even as she cursed him silently, she smoothed out the paper and slipped it into her pocket. The summer progressed, and Chalice grew busier with prospectors and travelers passing through. The saloon was crowded most nights, and Fiona had little time to dwell on her confusing feelings about Ethan. But he was always there, a steady presence in the chaos, helping where needed, protecting her from the worst of the rowdy behavior, never demanding anything in return. One particularly hot July evening, after the saloon had finally emptied and Pete had gone home, Fiona was wiping down tables when she felt Ethan's presence behind her. "You do not have to stay and help," she said without turning around. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds being the cloth on wood and the distant howl of a coyote. When they finished, Ethan walked her to the door. "Fiona," he said, and she paused, her hand on the doorframe. "Would you take a walk with me? Just down by the river. I promise to keep a respectful distance and have you home at a proper hour." Every instinct told her to refuse, to maintain her boundaries, to protect herself. But she was tired of being afraid, tired of the walls she had built, tired of dying slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "One walk." The smile that lit Ethan's face was worth the risk, she thought, even as her heart hammered with anxiety. They walked through the quiet streets of Chalice, the moonlight painting everything in shades of silver. When they reached the river, the sound of rushing water filled the air, constant and soothing. "I grew up near a river," Fiona said, surprising herself with the admission. "In Ohio before my family moved west. I used to sit by the water and read for hours." "What did you read?" Ethan asked, leaning against a large boulder. "Everything I could get my hands on. Novels, poetry, newspapers. I loved stories about adventure, about people going to new places and becoming new versions of themselves." She laughed bitterly. "I thought moving west would be my grand adventure." "Maybe it still can be," Ethan suggested gently. "Maybe the adventure is not about the place, but about what you discover about yourself along the way." "That sounds like something from one of those novels," Fiona said, but there was no mockery in her tone. "Does not make it untrue," Ethan replied. He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "I lost someone too. Her name was Sarah. We were supposed to get married, but she got sick with cholera during the epidemic in Kansas back in '73. I watched her die over the course of 3 days, and there was nothing I could do to stop it." Fiona turned to him, seeing his pain reflected in the moonlight. "I am so sorry, Ethan. I blame myself for a long time," he continued. "Thought maybe if I had gotten her to a doctor sooner, if I had done something different, she might have lived. Eventually, I realized that I could spend my whole life haunted by what ifs, or I could honor her memory by actually living." "How?" Fiona asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you move past the fear?" "You do not," Ethan said honestly. "The fear is always there, but you make a choice every day to not let it control you. You take small steps, like walks by the river with someone who cares about you. You let yourself feel things again, even though it is terrifying." "What if I cannot?" Fiona asked, and she was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "What if I am too broken to ever be whole again?" Ethan moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "You are not broken, Fiona. You are wounded, and that is different. Wounds can heal if you let them." "I do not know how," she admitted. "Then let me show you," Ethan said. "Day by day, moment by moment. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people learning to live again. Together." Fiona looked up at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been too afraid to voice. She saw kindness in his eyes and patience, and something that looked like love in its earliest, most fragile form. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said. "So am I. But maybe we can be afraid together, and that will make it a little less scary." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Ethan offered his hand, and after a long moment, she took it. His grip was warm and solid, anchoring her to the present moment. They stood like that for a while, hand in hand by the river, two wounded souls reaching across the darkness towards something that might be hope. The walk back to town was quiet but not uncomfortable. When they reached the general store where Fiona rented her room, Ethan squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. "Thank you for being patient," Fiona replied. That night, she slept better than she had in 2 years. The next day, Fiona felt both lighter and more vulnerable than she had in a long time. She caught herself watching Ethan as he worked, noticing small details she had forced herself to ignore before. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands, the soft Texas drawl that became more pronounced when he was tired. She was still afraid, but the fear no longer felt insurmountable. Ethan, for his part, continued his pattern of steady kindness, but now there was an understanding between them, an acknowledgement of the fragile thing growing in the space they shared. He brought her wildflowers every few days, different varieties that he found in the mountains or along the river. She accepted them now without protest, arranging them in jars around the saloon until Pete joked that the place was starting to look like a garden. "Nothing wrong with a little beauty in a rough place," Ethan replied, but he was looking at Fiona when he said it. They fell into a routine of evening walks when the saloon was closed, exploring different parts of Chalice and the surrounding area. Ethan showed her a meadow full of wildflowers, a hidden pool where the river widened into something calm and clear, a spot up in the hills where you could see the whole valley spread out below. Each place felt like a gift, carefully chosen to share something beautiful with her. During these walks, they talked about everything and nothing. Fiona found herself sharing stories from her childhood, her dreams of becoming a teacher before circumstances had led her elsewhere, her love of music and books. Ethan told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the books his mother had read to him by lamplight. She loved poetry, he said one evening, as they sat on a hillside, watching the sunset. Especially Whitman. She used to say that poetry reminded us we were alive, really alive, not just going through the motions. "I used to love poetry too," Fiona admitted. "I have not read any in years. It felt too painful, all those beautiful words about love and hope." "Would you like to start again?" Ethan asked. "Pete has some books in the back room of the saloon. I saw a collection of poems there." "Maybe," Fiona said, and that maybe felt like progress. The next day, Ethan brought her the book, a worn volume of poetry by various authors. Fiona accepted it with trembling hands, as if it were something precious and dangerous all at once. That night, alone in her room, she opened it to a random page and read. The words washed over her, beautiful and painful and alive. She cried as she read, but they were not tears of pure grief anymore. They were tears of someone beginning to thaw after a long winter, painful and necessary, and ultimately healing. August arrived with its heat and dust, and Chalice buzzed with activity as miners worked their claims and merchants did brisk business. The Silver Spur was busier than ever, and Fiona was grateful for the distraction on days when her emotions felt too raw, too close to the surface. One afternoon, a well-dressed man came into the saloon. Clearly not a miner or a cowboy. He had the look of someone from back east, with a fancy suit and polished shoes that were already coated in Idaho dust. He approached the bar and addressed Fiona with a condescending smile. "I am looking for a woman named Fiona Zimmerman. I was told she works here." Fiona felt her stomach drop. "I am Fiona Zimmerman. Who is asking?" "My name is Harold Pemberton. I am a lawyer representing the estate of Thomas Zimmerman. I have been looking for you for quite some time, Mrs. Zimmerman." The use of her married name felt like a slap. "What do you want?" "I need you to sign some documents regarding your late husband's affairs. There are also some personal effects that need to be delivered to you. May we speak somewhere more private?" Fiona glanced at Ethan, who had stopped what he was doing and was watching the exchange with concern. She nodded to the back room, and the lawyer followed her, his case of documents clutched officiously under his arm. In the dim privacy of the stockroom, Harold Pemberton laid out papers on a crate and began explaining in legal language that Thomas's parents, whom Fiona had met only once before the wedding, wanted to ensure that she received what was rightfully hers from their son's estate. There was some land, a small amount of money, and Thomas's personal belongings, which included letters and a journal. "Why did you not write to inform me?" Fiona asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We did several times, to your last known address in Virginia City. The letters were returned. You are a difficult woman to find, Mrs. Zimmerman." "I did not want to be found," Fiona said quietly. "Nevertheless, the law requires that these matters be settled. If you will sign here and here, we can conclude our business." Fiona signed with a shaking hand, feeling as though the past had reached out and grabbed her just when she was beginning to move forward. Pemberton produced a small trunk from where he had left it by the saloon entrance and set it before her. "These are his personal effects. I am sorry for your loss, Mrs. Zimmerman. Your husband's parents wanted me to tell you that they bear you no ill will and hope you can find peace." After the lawyer left, Fiona stood staring at the trunk, unable to move. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Ethan in the doorway. "You do not have to open it right now," he said gently, "or ever if you do not want to." "I should," Fiona said. "I should face it. Then I will be here with you if you want me to be." She nodded, and together they knelt beside the trunk. With trembling hands, Fiona opened the lid. Inside were Thomas's clothes, his pocket watch, his wedding ring, and a leather journal she had never seen before. There were also letters, tied with ribbon in her handwriting, the letters she had written to him during their brief courtship. Fiona picked up the journal, feeling the weight of it in her hands. "I did not know he kept a journal." "You do not have to read it now," Ethan reminded her. But Fiona was already opening it, drawn by a need to understand, to remember, to confront what she had been running from. The entries started months before she had met Thomas, documenting his daily life as a clerk in a mining office. Then there was the day he met her, described in detail that made her heart ache. "Met the most remarkable woman today. Her name is Fiona, and when she smiled, it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds." Fiona read through the entries, through Thomas's growing love for her, his excitement about their wedding, his plans for their future, and then she came to the final entry, written the morning of their wedding. "Today I marry Fiona. I am the luckiest man alive. Whatever happens, whatever the future holds, I will have known perfect happiness. If she reads this someday, I want her to know that loving her was the best thing I ever did, and I would not change a single moment." Tears streamed down Fiona's face as she closed the journal. Ethan put a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering comfort without words. She sat there for a long time, crying for the man she had loved and lost, for the life that had been stolen from them, for all the pain she had carried alone for so long. Finally, when the tears subsided, she looked up at Ethan. "He would not want me to stop living," she said, the realization settling over her like a benediction. "He would want me to be happy." "I think you are right," Ethan said softly. I have been so afraid, Fiona continued, that moving forward would mean forgetting him, betraying his memory, but staying frozen in grief is not honoring him either. He loved life, loved joy. He would hate knowing I gave those things up because of him. You have not given them up, Ethan said. You have just been keeping them safe until you were ready to feel them again. Fiona reached for Ethan's hand, holding it tightly. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for seeing past my fear. Always, Ethan said. They stayed there for a while longer, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, but no longer ruled by them. When they finally emerged from the back room, Fiona felt different, lighter, as if she had set down a burden she had been carrying for far too long. That night, after the saloon closed, they walked by the river again. The late summer air was warm, filled with the sound of crickets and the rush of water. Fiona stopped at their favorite spot and turned to face Ethan. I am not completely healed, she said. I still have bad days, and I am still afraid sometimes. But I want to try. With you, I want to try. Ethan's face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. That is all I could ever ask for. I think I am falling in love with you, Fiona admitted, the words terrifying and liberating all at once. I did not think I could ever feel this way again, but you proved me wrong. Day by day, you proved me wrong. Fiona, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. I have been in love with you since the first moment I saw you. You were polishing glasses behind the bar, and the sunlight came through the window and lit up your hair, and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Then you spoke to me, all thorns and walls, and I knew I had to find out who you really were beneath all that armor. And what did you find? Fiona asked, moving closer to him. Everything, Ethan said simply. I found everything. He cupped her face in his hands, gentle and reverent, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Fiona did not pull away. She rose up on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that connection. Ethan kissed her back with a tenderness that made her want to cry, his arms coming around her to hold her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I will spend every day proving to you that love does not have to end in loss. I cannot promise I will never die, because that is beyond anyone's control, but I can promise that every day we have together will be full of love and joy, and all the things that make life worth living. I believe you, Fiona whispered, and she realized it was true. Despite everything she had been through, despite all her fear and pain, she believed him. They stood there by the river, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had been broken finding themselves made whole in each other's arms. The following weeks brought a shift in the town's perception of Fiona and Ethan. Where before people had mostly ignored the quiet widow and the polite cowboy, now they were seen as a couple, and Chalice being a small town, everyone had an opinion about it. Most were supportive, happy to see Fiona smile again, pleased that Ethan had found a reason to stay. But there were a few who whispered about propriety and decent mourning periods, their disapproval hanging in the air like smoke. Fiona found she did not care as much as she thought she would. She had spent 2 years living for other people's expectations, burying herself in grief because that was what a proper widow should do. Now, with Ethan beside her, she was learning to live for herself again, to embrace happiness without guilt. They continued working at the Silver Spur, but now their partnership had a different quality. Ethan would brush past her with a gentle touch to her waist, or she would catch his eye across the crowded room and share a secret smile. Pete watched them with benevolent amusement, pleased that his two best employees had found each other. One September evening, when the air had begun to carry the first hints of autumn's chill, Ethan asked Fiona to go on a proper outing with him. There is a dance in the town hall this Saturday, he said. Nothing fancy, just miners and townspeople, but there will be music. Will you come with me? Fiona felt a flutter of anxiety. She had not danced since her wedding, since that horrible night when the music had been interrupted by gunfire. but she looked at Ethan's hopeful face and found herself nodding. "I would like that," she said, and meant it. Saturday arrived, and Fiona dressed in her best gown, a deep blue dress that she had not worn in years. She took extra care with her hair, leaving it down in soft waves instead of her usual severe bun. When she met Ethan outside the general store, the look on his face told her that the effort had been worth it. "You are stunning," he said, offering his arm. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Fiona replied, taking in his neat shirt and pressed trousers, his hair combed back from his face. The town hall was crowded with people, and a small group of musicians were tuning their instruments in the corner. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over everything. Several people greeted Fiona and Ethan as they entered, and Fiona was surprised by how welcome she felt, how normal. When the music started, a lively reel, Ethan led her onto the makeshift dance floor. Fiona felt her heart racing, memories threatening to overwhelm her, but then Ethan squeezed her hand and smiled at her, and she was anchored back in the present. They danced, and Fiona found herself laughing as Ethan spun her around, his own joy infectious. They danced several more dances, both fast and slow, and with each one, Fiona felt more of her fear falling away. This was not Virginia City, and Ethan was not Thomas, and she was not the same woman she had been 2 years ago. She was someone new, someone who was learning to embrace life again, and it felt wonderful. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for some air. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Ethan pulled Fiona close, and they swayed together to music only they could hear. "Thank you," Fiona said. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for not giving up, for showing me that I could be happy again." "You did the hard work," Ethan said. "I just walked beside you. That is everything," Fiona replied, and kissed him under the stars. As autumn deepened, Fiona and Ethan spent every free moment together. They took rides into the mountains on borrowed horses, Ethan teaching Fiona to handle the reins with confidence. They had picnics by the river, reading poetry to each other, and talking about their dreams for the future. They attended church services together on Sundays, and Fiona found comfort in the ritual she had abandoned after Thomas's death. One October afternoon, as they were walking back from a particularly beautiful spot where the aspens had turned gold, Ethan stopped and turned to face Fiona. "I have something I need to ask you," he said, and Fiona could see nervousness in his eyes. "What is it?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I know we have not been courting for very long, and I know you have been through more than any person should have to bear. But I also know that I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day. Fiona Zimmerman, will you marry me?" Fiona felt her breath catch in her throat. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part, the part that was still afraid, held her back. "I love you, Ethan," she said carefully, "but I am scared. What if something happens? What if I lose you too?" "Then you will grieve, and it will be awful, and eventually you will heal, because that is what you do," Ethan said gently. "But Fiona, we cannot live our lives afraid of what might happen. We have to embrace what we have right now, this moment, this love. I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise that I will love you fiercely and completely for as long as I am able." Fiona thought about Thomas's journal, about his words on their wedding day, about how he would want her to be happy. She thought about the past months with Ethan, about how he had slowly and patiently rebuilt her faith and love. She thought about the future, about all the moments they could share if she was brave enough to reach for them. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." Ethan let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until they were both laughing and dizzy. When he set her down, he kissed her with such passion and tenderness that Fiona felt it all the way to her soul. "I do not have a ring yet," Ethan admitted, "but I will get you one, I promise." "I do not need a ring," Fiona said. "I just need you." You have me, Ethan said. For as long as we both shall live, you have me. They walked back to town hand in hand, making plans and dreaming out loud about their future. Ethan wanted to save up enough money to buy a piece of land, start a small ranch. Fiona wanted to eventually open a school for the children in Chalice. They talked about the house they would build, the garden they would plant, the life they would create together. When they announced their engagement to Pete, he broke into a huge grin and insisted on buying them both a drink. I knew it from the first day that Cowboy walked in here, he said. Knew he was going to change everything. He did, Fiona agreed, smiling at Ethan. He really did. They decided to have a simple wedding in November, before the worst of the winter weather set in. Fiona did not want anything elaborate or showy. She wanted something small and meaningful, surrounded by the friends they had made in Chalice. Ethan agreed wholeheartedly, content to let Fiona make whatever decisions felt right to her. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Fiona found herself thinking often about Thomas. She talked to Ethan about him, sharing memories both happy and sad, and Ethan listened without jealousy, understanding that Thomas would always be a part of Fiona's story. One afternoon, Fiona took Thomas's wedding ring from the trunk and held it in her palm. I want to bury it, she told Ethan. Not to forget him, but to let him rest. To release both of us from the past. I think that is a beautiful idea, Ethan said. They went to the small cemetery on the edge of town, where a few rough markers stood testament to lives lived and lost in this hard country. Fiona found a quiet spot under a pine tree and dug a small hole with her hands. She placed the ring in the earth and covered it over, saying a silent prayer for the man who had loved her first. Thank you, Thomas, she whispered. Thank you for teaching me how to love. I will carry that gift forward with me. Ethan stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, as she said goodbye to her past. When she finally stood, brushing the dirt from her hands, she felt lighter than she had in years. The grief was still there, but it no longer weighed her down. It had become part of her story, a chapter that had shaped her but no longer defined her. The wedding day arrived on a crisp November morning. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the mountains were dusted with fresh snow. Fiona wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself with lace at the collar and cuffs. She carried a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers that Ethan had gathered for her at dawn. The ceremony took place in the small church at the center of town, with Pete serving as a witness and the local minister, Reverend Samuel Carson, officiating. A handful of townspeople attended, people who had watched Fiona and Ethan's love story unfold and wanted to be part of their new beginning. When Ethan saw Fiona walking down the short aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. She had never seen him cry before, and the sight of it made her own eyes water. They met at the altar, holding hands, and spoke their vows with voices that shook with emotion but rang with certainty. I, Ethan Ramsey, take you, Fiona Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for all the days of my life. I, Fiona Zimmerman, take you, Ethan Ramsey, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, trust you, and build a life with you, without fear, without reservation, for all the days of my life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Fiona with such gentle reverence that several people in the small congregation wiped away tears. As they walked back down the aisle together, Fiona felt Thomas's presence, not as a weight but as a blessing, as if he were giving his approval to this new chapter. The celebration afterward was held at the Silver Spur, which Pete had closed for the day and decorated with pine boughs and ribbons. There was food and drink and music, and Fiona and Ethan danced their first dance as husband and wife to a sweet, slow melody played on fiddle and guitar. Fiona rested her head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought about how far she had come from that broken woman who had fled Montana 2 years ago. What are you thinking? Ethan asked softly. That I am happy, Fiona replied. Genuinely, completely happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way again. Get used to it, Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. I plan to make you happy for the rest of our lives. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Fiona allowed herself to believe him, to believe in the future they would build together, to believe in love again. Ethan and Fiona spent their wedding night in a room above the saloon that Pete had prepared for them, simple but clean, with fresh linens and flowers on the nightstand. They made love for the first time, tender and passionate, discovering each other with patience and joy. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Fiona felt a completeness she had never expected to experience again. I love you, she whispered into the quiet. I love you too, Ethan replied. More than words can say. Winter arrived in earnest, blanketing Chalice in snow and confining most people to their homes and businesses. Fiona and Ethan moved into a small cabin on the edge of town that they rented from a prospector who had decided to head further west. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a fireplace, but they made it their own, filling it with books and the furniture Ethan built, with wildflowers dried and hung from the rafters, with the smell of Fiona's cooking and the sound of their laughter. They continued working at the Silver Spur through the winter, saving every penny they could toward their dream of buying land. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Fiona reading aloud while Ethan carved wood or mended tack, the comfortable silence of 2 people who had found their place in the world, broken only by the crackle of flames and the howl of wind outside. As winter gave way to spring in 1881, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening in late March, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a shout of pure joy, picking her up and spinning her around despite her protests. We are going to have a baby, he kept repeating, as if he could not quite believe it. We are going to have a baby! Put me down before you make me dizzy. Fiona laughed, but she was crying too, overwhelmed by happiness. Ethan set her down carefully, then knelt and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. Hello in there, little one. Your mama and I cannot wait to meet you. The pregnancy progressed well, and Fiona bloomed with health and happiness. Ethan became even more protective and attentive, if that were possible, making sure she did not work too hard, bringing her little treats and surprises to make her smile. They spent hours discussing names, planning for the baby's arrival, dreaming about the future. In May, just after Fiona's 26th birthday, Ethan came home with news that lit up his whole face. I found it, Fiona. I found our land. He had been scouting properties for weeks, talking to landowners and checking out parcels that might be for sale. The land he had found was about 3 miles outside of Chalice, a beautiful valley with a creek running through it, good grass for cattle, and a stand of pine trees that would provide lumber for building. The owner is an older man who wants to move to Boise to be near his daughter. He is willing to sell it for a fair price, and with the money we have saved, plus what you inherited from Thomas, we can afford it. Fiona felt a moment of hesitation at the mention of Thomas's money, but then she realized that this was exactly what Thomas would have wanted, for her to use those resources to build a happy life. Let us go see it, she said. They rode out the next day, and Fiona fell in love with the property immediately. She could picture their house there, the garden she would plant, the barn for horses and cattle, the children running through the meadow. It felt right in a way that nothing had felt right since before Thomas died. Let us do it, she said to Ethan. Let us buy this land and build our home here. Ethan pulled her close, careful of her growing belly, and kissed her soundly. We are going to have such a good life here, Fiona. I promise you. The paperwork was completed within 2 weeks, and suddenly they were landowners, with a future spread out before them like the valley they now possessed. Ethan began working on building a small house immediately, with help from some of the men in town who owed him favors or simply wanted to lend a hand to the couple everyone had grown to love. By late summer, the house was finished, small but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a good kitchen, and a front porch that looked out over the valley. They moved their few possessions from the cabin in town, and Fiona spent happy hours making the house into a home, sewing curtains, arranging furniture, preparing a nursery for the baby that would arrive in the fall. Pete was sorry to lose them from the Silver Spur, but he understood their need to build their own life. He threw them a goodbye party at the saloon, and half the town showed up to wish them well. Fiona was touched by how many friends they had made, how accepted she had become in this rough mining town. Their son was born on a cool October evening in 1881, delivered by the local midwife with Ethan hovering anxiously nearby. When the baby's first cry filled the room, Ethan broke down sobbing with relief and joy. The midwife handed the baby to Fiona, who looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened her. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "Just like his mother," Ethan said, sitting beside her on the bed and carefully touching the baby's tiny hand. They named him Samuel, after the minister who had married them, with James as a middle name after Ethan's father. Samuel had Fiona's blonde hair and Ethan's gray-green eyes, and from the first moment, he owned their hearts completely. The first year of Samuel's life was filled with the exhausting, exhilarating chaos of new parenthood. Sleepless nights and diaper changes, first smiles and first laughs, teething and learning to crawl. Through it all, Ethan and Fiona worked together, supporting each other, falling more in love with each passing day. Ethan proved to be a wonderful father, patient and tender with his son, singing him to sleep with old cowboy songs and carrying him around the property, showing him the horses and cattle they had begun to acquire. Fiona would watch them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. On their first wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Fiona with a gift, a delicate gold ring with a small sapphire, the color of the Idaho sky. "I know I said you did not need a ring," he said as he slipped it onto her finger, "but I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that represents the life we have built together." "It is perfect," Fiona said, admiring how the stone caught the light. "Everything is perfect." And it was. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, a few pigs, chickens for eggs. Fiona planted a large garden and learned to preserve food for the winter. Ethan built a bigger barn and added on to the house as they could afford it. They made trips into Chalice regularly, maintaining their friendships in town, attending church services and social events. When Samuel was 2 years old, Fiona became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Grace Ellen, after both of their mothers. Grace had dark hair like Ethan and blue eyes that reminded Fiona of Thomas. She saw it as a gift, a connection to the past that was sweet rather than painful. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Samuel grew into a curious, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for the animals. Grace was quieter, thoughtful, with a love of books that mirrored Fiona's own. They added another son, David, when Samuel was 5, and then a third daughter, Mary, 2 years after that. The house grew along with the family, rooms added on as needed, always a work in progress but filled with love and laughter. Fiona eventually started the school she had dreamed about, teaching the ranch children and a few from neighboring properties in a room they built onto the house specifically for that purpose. Ethan became known throughout the region as an honest rancher and a fair dealer, and their brand was respected. Through the years, Fiona sometimes thought about the broken woman she had been when she first arrived in Chalice, hardly able to imagine how much her life had changed. She kept Thomas's journal in a special box, along with the letters and a few other mementos, and sometimes she would take them out and remember the young man who had loved her first. But there was no pain in the remembering anymore, only gratitude for the love he had shown her and the path it had set her on. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan took Fiona back to the spot by the river where he had first told her he would wait for her as long as it took. The children were staying with Pete, who had become like a grandfather to them, giving Ethan and Fiona a rare evening alone. "Do you remember standing here that summer night? Ethan asked, holding both of her hands. You were so scared, and I was so determined to prove to you that love did not have to end in loss. I remember, Fiona said. I remember thinking you were crazy for being so patient with me. Was I right? Ethan asked, though he was smiling because he already knew the answer. Did I prove you wrong? Every single day, Fiona replied. Every single day you prove me wrong. You have given me a life I never dreamed possible, a family I treasure more than anything, and a love that has healed every broken piece of me. You did the same for me, Ethan said seriously. I was drifting, lost, until I walked into that saloon and saw you. You gave me purpose, gave me a home, gave me everything that matters. They kissed as the river rushed by, the same river that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward each other, now bearing testimony to a love that had endured and deepened over a decade. The evening light turned everything golden, and in that moment, Fiona felt the completeness of her journey, from broken widow to beloved wife and mother, from someone afraid to live to someone embracing every moment with joy. As they walked back toward home, where their 4 children waited with stories to tell and hugs to give, Fiona sent a silent thank you to Thomas for teaching her how to love, to Ethan for reminding her why life was worth living, and to herself for being brave enough to try again. The years continued to unfold with their share of challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when the creek ran low, illnesses that scared them and tested their faith. But through it all, Ethan and Fiona faced everything together, their love the foundation that held firm no matter what storms came. Samuel grew into a young man who inherited his father's skill with horses and his mother's sharp mind. At 18, he began courting a girl from one of the neighboring ranches, a sweet young woman named Catherine who fit into their family as if she had always belonged there. Grace, quieter but no less determined, announced at 16 that she wanted to go to Boise to study to become a real teacher with proper training and certification. Fiona was both proud and terrified, but she and Ethan supported their daughter's dreams, just as Ethan had once supported Fiona's. David showed a talent for working with wood, just like his grandfather James, whom he had never met but whose spirit seemed to live on in him. He spent hours in the workshop Ethan had built, carving and building, creating beautiful and useful things with his hands. Mary, the baby of the family, even as she grew into a spirited young girl, loved the animals with a fierce devotion, spending hours in the barn tending to horses and cattle, completely unafraid of the largest bull or the most skittish colt. In 1896, when Fiona was 41 and Ethan 43, they celebrated their 15th anniversary, surrounded by their growing family. Samuel had married Catherine the year before, and they had just welcomed Fiona and Ethan's first grandchild, a boy they named Thomas in honor of the man whose death had set Fiona on the path that eventually led her to Chalice. When Fiona held baby Thomas for the first time, she wept openly, overcome by the strange and beautiful symmetry of life. Ethan held her as she cried, understanding without words what she was feeling. He would be happy, Ethan said quietly. Thomas would be happy knowing that his name lives on, that you found joy again. I know, Fiona replied, looking down at the tiny face of her grandson. I know he would. That evening, after the family had dispersed to their various homes and beds, Fiona and Ethan sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley they had built their life in. The house behind them was quiet, though it still held Grace, David, and Mary, who would fly the nest in their own time. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-tended, a testament to years of hard work and careful management. Do you ever think about that first day I walked into the Silver Spur? Ethan asked, his arm around Fiona's shoulders. Sometimes, Fiona admitted. I think about how close I came to sending you away, to keeping those walls up forever. What made you let me in? Ethan asked, though they had discussed this before. It was a story they both loved to revisit, the story of how they found each other. You did not push, Fiona said thoughtfully. Everyone else wanted me to move on, to be okay, to be the person I was before Thomas died. But you just accepted where I was and met me there. You did not try to fix me or change me. You just showed me day by day that there was still beauty in the world, still reasons to be alive. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you, Ethan confessed, as he had many times before. But I fell deeper in love with you every day after that, watching you fight your way back to life, watching you choose courage over fear. We did it together, Fiona said. I could not have done it without you. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them that night by the river when Fiona had first admitted her fear, when Ethan had first promised to wait. So much had changed since then, but the core of who they were to each other remained constant. As the years rolled on into the new century, Fiona and Ethan watched their family continue to grow and change. Grace came back from Boise with her teaching certificate and opened a proper school in Chalice, fulfilling the dream she and her mother had shared. David married a girl from town and built a house on the far edge of their property, taking over more and more of the ranch operations, as Ethan's back began to ache more and his hands grew stiff with age. Mary, true to form, became a veterinarian's assistant in Boise, one of the first women in the region to take on such a role, breaking barriers with the same fierce determination she had shown as a child. By 1910, Ethan and Fiona had 7 grandchildren, with another on the way. They had sold off part of the ranch to David and Samuel, keeping just the original house and enough land for a small garden and a few horses. They were content to let the younger generation do the heavy work, enjoying a slower pace of life that allowed them to focus on each other and their family. One summer evening, as they sat on the same porch where they had spent so many hours over the years, Ethan took Fiona's hand. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. Fiona considered the question seriously, as she always did when Ethan asked her something important. "I regret that Thomas died so young that we did not get to have the life we planned, but I cannot regret the path that loss set me on because it led me to you, and I would not trade our life together for anything." "Good," Ethan said, squeezing her hand, "because neither would I. Every day with you has been a gift, Fiona. Even the hard days, even the days when things went wrong, they were worth it because we faced them together. Do you remember telling me that I was not broken, just wounded?" Fiona asked. "That wounds could heal?" "I remember," Ethan said. "You were right," Fiona said simply. "I did heal. We healed each other." They watched the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The sound filled Fiona with a contentment so deep it felt like peace. This was what she had been too broken to believe in all those years ago, this simple, profound happiness. This life built day by day with someone who loved her, this family they had created together, this home they had made in the Idaho wilderness. Ethan had been right when he said that love did not have to end in loss. Love could also mean building something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. As darkness fell and the stars came out, Ethan and Fiona went inside their home, the home they had built with their own hands and filled with their love. They climbed into bed together, as they had done thousands of nights before, and fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and for every day they had been given to share. Years continued to pass, and Ethan and Fiona grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with the evidence of a life well lived. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1921, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held at the ranch, which was now run entirely by David and his oldest son, but which would always be Fiona and Ethan's in the ways that mattered most. Standing in the yard where they had built their dreams, watching their family laugh and eat and celebrate, Fiona leaned into Ethan's embrace and thought about the scared, broken woman she had been when she first arrived in Chalice 41 years ago. That woman would never have believed that this life was possible, that this kind of happiness existed, but it did exist, and she had lived it, every precious day of it. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan. "For what?" he asked, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "For everything," Fiona said. "For seeing me when I was invisible. For waiting when I was too afraid to move forward. For loving me through the healing and beyond. For giving me this life, this family, this love." "It was all my privilege," Ethan replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single moment." They danced that night, slowly and carefully, their bodies not as nimble as they once were, but their hearts just as full. The music played, not fiddles and guitars anymore, but a phonograph someone had brought from town, and the sky above them was full of stars, the same stars that had witnessed their whole journey. When Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1923, 3 months after his 71st birthday, Fiona grieved deeply, but without the desperate, consuming anguish that had marked Thomas's death. This was a different kind of loss, still painful but somehow complete. They had lived a full life together, had loved each other well, had built something lasting. There was sadness in his passing, but there was also gratitude for all the years they had shared. At his funeral, their children and grandchildren shared stories about Ethan, about his kindness and patience, his skill with horses, his terrible singing voice that he used anyway, his absolute devotion to his family. Fiona listened and cried and smiled, adding her own memories to the collection. She spoke about the day he walked into the Silver Spur, about how he had proven her wrong day by day, about how he had shown her that love was worth the risk of loss. After the funeral, Catherine, Samuel's wife, took Fiona aside. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you bear losing someone you loved so much?" Fiona thought about the question, about the two great loves of her life, both now gone. "You bear it because they gave you something worth bearing it for," she said finally. "Ethan gave me 43 years of joy and love and partnership. The pain of losing him is the price I pay for having had him at all, and it is a price I would pay again in a heartbeat." Fiona lived for another 7 years after Ethan's death, dying quietly in her sleep just 2 days after her 75th birthday in 1930. In those final years, she was surrounded by her children and grandchildren who took turns caring for her and keeping her company. She spent her days reading, tending a small garden, and telling stories about the past to any grandchild or great-grandchild who would listen. She spoke often of Ethan, keeping his memory alive through her words. She also spoke of Thomas, ensuring that the young man who had been her first love was not forgotten. And she spoke of her own journey, from broken widow to healed woman, hoping that her story might help others find their way through their own darkness. On the day she died, she was found with a smile on her face, her hand resting on a photograph of Ethan taken at their 40th anniversary. Beside the photograph was Thomas's old journal, and tucked inside it was the note Ethan had written to her all those years ago in the Silver Spur. "I will wait as long as it takes, even if it takes forever. You are worth waiting for." Her funeral was attended by more than 100 people, a testament to the life she had lived and the impact she had made on her community. Her children spoke about her strength and courage, about how she had overcome devastating loss to build something beautiful. They spoke about her love for Ethan and for all of them, about how she had taught them through her example that it was possible to survive anything and still choose joy. Fiona was buried next to Ethan on a hillside overlooking the valley where they had built their life together. The gravestone was simple, bearing both their names and the dates of their lives, along with a single inscription chosen by their children. Day by day, they proved that love endures. The story of Fiona and Ethan became part of the family lore, passed down through generations. Their great-great-grandchildren would visit the old ranch, now preserved as part of the family heritage, and hear about the widow who thought she was too broken to love again, and the cowboy who patiently proved her wrong. The house still stood, weathered but sturdy, filled with photographs and mementos from a life well lived. In time, the story took on an almost mythical quality, becoming a tale about the power of patience, the possibility of healing, and the enduring nature of true love. But to those who had known Fiona and Ethan personally, there was nothing mythical about it. It was simply the truth, the story of two wounded people who found each other in a rough mining town in Idaho and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The land they had purchased together remained in the family, passed down from generation to generation, each one adding their own story to the rich tapestry of the property's history. The creek still ran through the valley, the pine trees still stood tall, and on quiet evenings, if you stood on the porch of the old house, you could almost hear the echo of laughter and conversation, of a family gathered together, of two people who had loved each other well. And so the story ends, but not really, because the love that Fiona and Ethan shared continued to ripple outward through time, touching everyone who came after them. It was a legacy more valuable than the land or the cattle or anything material they had built. It was the legacy of choosing love over fear, of healing over staying broken, of believing that even after the worst loss, there could be joy again. In the end, that was the real story, not just of Fiona and Ethan, but of all of us who dare to love, despite knowing that loss is inevitable. We love because it is worth it, because the joy of connection outweighs the pain of separation, because building something beautiful together is the very best way to spend a life. Fiona learned this truth through her journey from despair to hope, from isolation to community, from believing she was too broken to love again to discovering that with the right person, day by day, anything was possible. And that made all the difference,